Welcome to our final PBL video for social justice issues. This video was created by Anita, Kaylee, myself, and Jenna.
Before we begin our presentation, please consider the following questions. Number 1, what are some problems you can think of when it comes to employment of people with disabilities? Number 2, have you worked with someone with a disability, and if so, was it any different than working with other coworkers? And finally, number 3, do you think people with disabilities contribute equally in the workplace as people without disabilities?
We have chosen to research the problem of access to employment for people with disabilities. People with disabilities are employed at half the rate of non-disabled people. The current economic climate is also making this much harder for people with disabilities to obtain employment. Poverty rates amongst people with disabilities are higher on a worldwide basis. When it comes to hiring people with disabilities, employers can either be open and hire people with disabilities, or they can be against it and not hire anyone with a disability. Some problems also arise from policies that have been created to protect people with disabilities from unfair dismissal. However, this can create a problem as employers may not hire a person with a disability because of these policies.
Before we dive deep into the problem, we would like to briefly discuss some statistics regarding people with disabilities in the workforce. The study was done in 2011 but wasn't published until 2014. First, 49% of Canadians aged 25 to 64 with a disability are employed. This means that more than half of people with disabilities in this age group are unemployed. Next, 79% of Canadians aged 25 to 64 without a disability are employed. This is over 3/4 of people being employed compared to half of people with disabilities being employed. Third, we show the employment rates for Canadians aged 25 to 64 with different levels of disabilities. 68% of employment rates belong to those with a mild disability. 54% belong to those with a moderate disability. 42% of employment rates belong to those with a severe disability, and only 26% of the employment rate belongs to those with a very severe disability. Another statistic is that 12% of Canadians with a disability have reported being refused a job in the last 5 years because of their disability. The last statistic we will discuss is that 33% of Canadians with severe or very severe disabilities aged 25 to 34 have reported the same.
According to Statistics Canada, a higher level of education is associated with a higher employment rate both for individuals without and with disabilities, regardless of the severity of the disability, as shown on this graph. What is important for our research is how better education significantly improves employment opportunities for people with special needs. While the gaps in employment rate between people of different abilities are quite significant without a high school diploma, and even though employment opportunities increase for all groups with a high school diploma, the gap between people without and with disabilities remains significant. Trade certificates or college diplomas not only further increase employment opportunities for all groups, but also, according to this graph, close the gap between people without and people with mild disabilities. People with moderate or severe disabilities employability also increases with that level of education, and the gap between them and the first two groups I mentioned is smaller at this education level. Finally, at an university education level, we see again a small gap between people without and with mild disabilities, but people with moderate disabilities have almost the same employability rate at this stage, while people with severe disabilities see another increase that also demonstrates more equal job opportunities and a smaller employability gap compared to any other levels of education.
Next, we will discuss the history of the problem. So over the past 40 years, the government has worked at creating and updating legislative acts to try and solve the problems of people with disabilities entering the workforce. Some of the anti-discriminatory acts and policies that have been passed included the Employment Equity Act, the Income Support Act, the Canadian Assistive Plan, and Employability Assistance. Although we have made great progress with the help of these acts and policies, we still have problems that are occurring with people with disabilities not being hired, and this is something that we want to fix.
There are many current programs that are in effect to support workers with disabilities in the workplace. Some to name include the Labor Market Development Agreements for Employment Benefits and Support Measures, Canada Job Fund Agreements for Economically Disadvantaged Individuals, Labor Market Agreements for Persons with Disabilities, Opportunities Fund, Enhancing Accessibility Fund, Canada Pension Plan Disability Vocational Rehabilitation Program, and the Entrepreneurs with Disability Program.
We discussed 3 areas where solutions could stem from to provide access to employment for people with disabilities. First, we looked at education. It is important for post-secondary institutions to ensure access and provide the required accommodations for students with disabilities. This would allow students to earn their education as anyone else would. We also looked at the idea of creating specialized co-op programs for students. The student would complete the co-op placement in an area of interest or based on their education program, and after would lead to employment. Lastly, we looked at training in the secondary school level, where there would be partnerships with local employers. Students would receive basic training through a course at school, and then they would be eligible for employment opportunities.
Some of the solutions in relation to providing more specific employment opportunities are to provide assistance services for job search, including job application, cover letter, and resume writing, interview preparation, and assistance through contacting potential employers and providing them with the necessary information about adaptation to the hiring process. This will allow employers to accommodate the specific limitations of every individual with special needs applying to work for them, as well as increase those individuals' chances to be hired due to the improved opportunity to represent themselves to the best of their ability. Next, we propose workplace support that would ensure continued and successful employment. Support could include the job assistance service agent remaining in contact with employer and employee, facilitating communication if necessary, and identifying or addressing any potential difficulties, which would not only ensure successful employment but also optimal business operations. Lastly, federal and provincial programs providing incentives for employers to hire people with disabilities, such as tax credits, grants, employer and public education, etc., would further make employing people with disabilities more simple and attractive to potential employers.
Lastly, we looked at the area of community in the world. We believe local initiatives should be created to raise awareness and connect businesses with disability support programs. Employers can be invited to these initiatives to talk to support staff and possible employees to realize the misunderstandings around people with disabilities working in the workforce. Programs could also be created provincially to provide opportunities for people to connect and promote community inclusion. Community support is important in decreasing prejudice and making changes in the workforce.
On this page, we will discuss some examples of solutions. First, we will discuss the solution of providing co-op opportunities. Allowing students to take place in co-ops is beneficial to the student, but to the employer as well. Co-op placements allow the student to showcase their skills and talents in the workforce, which can change the perception that people with disabilities work less efficiently as people without disabilities. Co-op placements also often lead to job opportunities if the employer found the student to be a good worker. These co-op opportunities would be available for both high school and post-secondary level students. Next, we will discuss some solutions in regards to the community initiatives. Social programs should be created to provide opportunities for people with disabilities and employers to connect. Community initiatives can also raise awareness to the injustices of employment for people with disabilities. Connecting local businesses with a disability support program is also a great way of getting people working. An example of this is the Ontario Disability Employment Network. This network aims to remove barriers of employment for people with disabilities. They also work to develop marketing initiatives and provide education for businesses about the benefits of including people with disabilities in the workplace. They also work at improving the skills and competency of the employment service providers through networking, sharing information, training, and promotion of best practice. And lastly, we looked at the funding, like raising funds for further awareness of this issue, and by creating provincial and federal funding to provide incentives for employers to hire people with disabilities. An example of this would be the Student Work Integrated Learning Program, also known as SWILP.
That concludes this video. Here are references for our assignment. Now, referring back to the questions discussed at the beginning of the video, have your views on employment and disabilities changed? How so?